know someone who wasn't able to be here right with us live right now, that will be available to watch afterwards. And to everyone who is watching on YouTube right now, welcome. We're excited to have you viewing, as well as those of us in the Zoom chat. So I would like to advise everyone that the webinar is being recorded. So just so you all know that, and we're live on YouTube. And please use the chat as we're going through until we open it up for check-ins. And I think that's everything from me. So I am going to be passing it over to Allison.
All right, welcome everyone. It is wonderful to see everyone here tonight. I hope everyone had a wonderful President's Day. And a little bit about President's Day. President's Day was originally established in 1885 in recognition of President George Washington. The holiday became popularly known as President's Day after it was moved as part of 1971's Uniform Monday Holiday Act, which was an attempt to create more three-day weekends for the nation's workers. While several states still have individual holidays honoring the birthdays of Washington, Lincoln, and other figures, President's Day is now popularly viewed as a day to celebrate all U.S. presidents, past and present. And of course, tonight we have a perfect person speaking the day after President's Day, Craig Smith. In addition to serving on the Rancho Los Cerritos Foundation Board, Dr. Craig Smith is Professor Emeritus in Communication Studies at USC ULB, has authored 20 books, and has appeared on such major media outlets such as CBS, CNN, MSNBC, and Fox News. Why? Well, in part, at least, because of the book he wrote as having been a speechwriter for former presidents Gerald Ford and George H.W. Bush. The book was called Confessions of a Presidential Speechwriter in 2014. So with that really impressive resume, I'm going to turn it over to Craig Smith, who will be talking with us tonight about presidential speechwriting. Craig, take it away.
Thank you, Allison. And I want to begin by thanking all the volunteers for all the work you do for the Rancho. We've had a wonderful response to COVID, and it's just been incredible how well the Rancho has maintained itself. And that is really heavily due to the work of our volunteers. So thank you very much for what you do. Tonight, bouncing off President's Day, I want to talk about speechwriting and the presidency, and I'll conclude with some of my experiences once I became a speechwriter for President Ford. But as you might recognize, the first speechwriter was for the first president, George Washington. When Washington was elected president, he decided it would be a good thing to give an inaugural address. So the first inaugural address was given at the Federal Building in New York City. But before he went to give it, and in those days, the inauguration was on March 4th. So there was a long distance between the election and the inauguration. And the reason for that, of course, is people had to travel, and travel was slow in those days. So back at Mount Vernon, Washington started thinking about how he was going to compose his inaugural address. And he told his secretary to compose one for him. And the secretary tried to do that. And what happened was George Washington wasn't very happy with what the secretary wrote. So he sent a message down the road to Mount Pelier, where his friend James Madison lived with his lovely wife, Dolly. And he asked James Madison if Madison would please write the inaugural for him. And Madison obliged. And so the first inaugural was written by James Madison and delivered by George Washington in New York City. And it was very successful. The rhetoric of the time, the speech making of the time, was very formal, very Ciceronian. And that's named after the famous senator of Rome, Cicero, who became consul twice and was eventually done in by Mark Antony. But it's a high-minded kind of rhetoric that indicates that the person who is speaking is serving the government, not serving themselves. And so that's how the writing went early on. And then along came Andrew Jackson, and there was a kind of romantic revolution in the country. It was called the Second Great Awakening. Evangelicals were all over the place, holding outdoor rallies. And Andrew Jackson tapped into that with a much more emotional rhetoric than the rhetoric you would hear from James Madison or Monroe or Jefferson or Washington. So that was one of the first changes that took place. Jackson, of course, had been the hero of the Battle of the War of 1812, the Battle of New Orleans in 1814, the same year, by the way, that our Capitol was burned. The last time there was an attack on it before the recent one. So the speakers became more emotional. And one of the ways you won the presidency was by being a general who'd been successful. One of those generals was William Henry Harrison. And Harrison had fought the Battle of Tippecanoe against an Indian tribe led by Chief Pontiac, and had won the Battle of Tippecanoe, and that kind of became his slogan. And so when he ran for president, he picked a Democrat to run with him he was a Whig, as a unity ticket. And so the slogan of that campaign was Tippecanoe and Tyler too, as you may recall. They won the 1840 election when William Henry Harrison composed an inaugural that was about 90 minutes long. And then he took it to Daniel Webster, the famous senator from Massachusetts, who was also a member of the Whig Party. And he said to Daniel Webster, "What do you think of this?" And Webster said, "It is way too long. This is more like a State of the Union letter or address. You need to cut it down." Well, William Henry Harrison refused to comply. And so he got up on March 4th, 1841, and gave his inaugural address, all hour and a half of it. Then he got on his horse and participated in the inaugural parade. The only problem was that all that day was a cold, icy rain. The president got a cold. It turned into pneumonia, and he died a month later, the shortest presidency in our history. Led to a constitutional crisis because John Tyler, a Democrat, then became president. The cabinet resigned, and there was bad feelings all the way around after those tragic events. Of course, probably the most dramatic presidency was the presidency of Abraham Lincoln. Lincoln said that he learned how to write speeches, and he wrote beautiful speeches. He learned how to write speeches by reading the King James Version of the Bible and by reading Shakespeare. That those were his two inspirations. But he also had speechwriters. One of the men who ran against Lincoln for president for the Republican nomination in 1860 was William Seward, the governor of New York. Once Lincoln became president, he appointed Seward to be his Secretary of State and then asked him for advice when composing speeches. One of the most important speeches that Lincoln gave was his first inaugural address. By the time he got up on March 4th, 1861, 7 states had seceded from the Union. Maryland was on the edge of seceding, so was Kentucky, and so was Missouri. Seward and Lincoln sat down and tried to come up with a way of keeping those states in the Union by being conciliatory toward them. So they composed Lincoln's first inaugural together. And I want to read the final 2 paragraphs of that because you can see the conciliatory nature that Seward and Lincoln put into it. Reads as follows: "In my hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in your hands, my dissatisfied fellow countrymen, and not in mine, is the momentous issue of civil war." Think about the Civil War. "The government will not assail you. You can have no conflict without being yourselves the aggressors. You have no oath registered in heaven to destroy the government, while I shall have the most solemn one to preserve, protect, and defend it. I am loath to close. We are not enemies, but friends. We must not be enemies. Though passion may have strained, it must not break our bonds of affection. The mystic cords of memory, stretching from every battlefield and patriot grave to every living heart and hearthstone all over this broad land, will yet swell the chorus of union when again touched, as surely they will be, by the better angels of their nature." It's one of the most beautiful passages, I think, in any inaugural address, and it's a product of two very good writers. Seward also helped Lincoln with his famous speech at Gettysburg. They were composing it on envelopes as they took the train from Washington, D.C. to Gettysburg. And that was in November of 1863. The Battle of Gettysburg had been in July of 1863, and they were still burying bodies as they converted the battlefield to a cemetery. And that's where Lincoln gave his famous Gettysburg address, calling for a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. By the time Lincoln got to his second inaugural address in March of 1865, the war was almost over. It would end almost a month later. Unfortunately, also a month later, almost a month later, Lincoln would be assassinated. But in his second inaugural address, again, Lincoln was conciliatory. Here's what Lincoln and Seward put together for that address at the end. With malice toward none, with charity for all, with firmness in the right as God gives us to see the right, let us strive to finish the work we are in, to bind up the nation's wounds, to care for him who shall have borne the battle, and for his widow and his orphan, and to do all which may achieve and cherish a just and lasting peace among ourselves and with all nations. Lincoln spoke in what we call the periodic style. You can see the prepositional phrases kind of marching across the page. Barack Obama spoke in the same style. That's very different than the conversational style. The conversational style, when you hear it, it's as if the person is having a conversation with you. Ronald Reagan was very good at that. Bill Clinton was very good at that. And when you write for those people, you write in a wholly different style than you would write for a Lincoln or a Barack Obama. I want to jump forward in time to Franklin Roosevelt, because I think he's the next president that shows how important being a good speechwriter can be. Roosevelt was his own best writer. He had been on the Harvard Crimson. He had edited the Harvard Crimson when he was an undergraduate. He had studied language. He knew how to use it. And he brought it to bear, first of all, in attacking the Depression, and then later in attacking our enemies in World War II. And he also was very good at relying on people to make suggestions for his speeches. He had a kitchen cabinet. Sam Rosenman was his permanent speechwriter, but many other people like Rex Tugwell and some of the other names you're familiar with, Francis Perkins, contributed to Roosevelt's rhetoric. But one of the keys to understanding Roosevelt's success as a speaker was that he didn't use big words. He used rhythms and repetitions to achieve his ends. One of the favorites of mine is a speech he gave in 1940 when he was trying to move the country closer to war, realizing that by 1940, fascism had gotten out of hand, and it was really a very bad thing that had to be dealt with. And so he gave a speech in which he articulated what he called the four freedoms, basic four freedoms that everyone should have. And listen to the repetition and the rhythm and some of the alliteration that he has in the phrasing in this speech. The first is freedom of speech and expression everywhere in the world. The second is freedom of every person to worship God in his own way everywhere in the world. The third is freedom from want, which translated into world terms means economic understanding, which will secure to every nation a healthy and peacetime life for its inhabitants everywhere in the world. The fourth is freedom from fear, which translated into world terms means a worldwide reduction of armaments to such a point and in such a thorough fashion that no nation will be in a position to commit an act of physical aggression against any neighbor anywhere in the world. The rhythms and the use of the W sound really sustain those passages as he goes through those speeches. Another favorite of mine was the president that preceded my president, Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon's administration, as we know, ended in a kind of sad tragedy, although he was a very successful president for quite some time. The way he got the nomination was really important to the Republican Party. And once he got up to give his acceptance of the nomination, he gave a speech which solidified his support among his party members, but also reached out to the rest of the nation. One of the people who was very instrumental in that speech was an English teacher named William Gavin, who had joined Nixon's speechwriting staff. And he wrote the end of the speech. Now, the speech, for the most part, in the early going, talked about the issues and Nixon's position on those issues, the war in Vietnam, the economic situation, law and order. He got people nodding their heads saying, you know, I think I agree with Nixon on this. But he wanted to cement that commitment with an emotional, persuasive, what we call peroration at the end. And that's what Gavin gave him. Listen to the contrasting dreams that Nixon sets out that really provide the drama of the moment. There's a nightmare and then there's a dream. Here's how it went. Tonight I see the face of a child. He lives in a great city. That child in that great city is more important than any politician's promise. He is America. He is a poet. He is a scientist. He is a great teacher. He is a profound craftsman. He is everything we hope to be and everything we dared to dream to be. He sleeps the sleep of childhood and he dreams the dreams of a child. And yet when he awakens to a living nightmare of poverty, neglect, and despair. He fails in school. He ends up on welfare. For him, the American system is one that feeds his stomach and starves his soul. It breaks his heart. And in the end, it may take his life on some foreign battlefield. But this is only part of what I see in America. I see another child tonight. He hears the trains go by, and he dreams of faraway places where he'd like to go. It seems like an impossible dream, but he's helped on his journey through life. A father who sacrificed everything he had so that his sons could go on to college. A Quaker mother with a passionate concern for peace quietly wept when he went to war. A great teacher, a remarkable football coach, an inspirational minister encouraged him on his way. A courageous wife and loyal children stood by him in victory and also in defeat. And in his chosen profession of politics, first there were scores, then there were hundreds, then thousands, and finally millions worked for his success. And tonight he stands before you, nominated for President of the United States. I was on the floor of the convention when Nixon gave that speech, and it was followed by a 10-minute demonstration that was really incredible to watch. As I said, Nixon's presidency ended in tragedy, and he was succeeded by Gerald Ford. One day I was guest lecturing in the morning at the University of North Carolina, and President Ford came to the campus, the University of North Carolina, and gave a speech at noon to the future homemakers of America. And I went over to see the speech, and I thought it was pretty bad. And so I wrote to the White House, and I couldn't understand why the president didn't have better speechwriters, why he wasn't giving a better speech, and explained as constructively as I could what I would have done different with that speech. And a week later, I was invited to the White House to come up and interview to be a speechwriter. And I passed the interview, and I became a speechwriter for President Ford. My first speech was something of a hazing. Ford had accepted an invitation to speak before the Southern Baptist Convention. If you may recall, he was running against Jimmy Carter, and Jimmy Carter was loved by the Southern Baptists. He was a born-again candidate for president. So Ford was kind of walking into the lion's den, and I got assigned to that as my first speech. So you had a Catholic speechwriter writing for an Episcopal president who was going to speak for the Southern Baptists. So I did as much research as I could. I talked to a lot of Southern Baptist ministers, and then I wrote the speech. President Ford went down to Norfolk, Virginia, and delivered the speech. He was interrupted by applause 13 times and got headlines in the Washington newspapers. And Ford began to make a comeback in the polls against Jimmy Carter, whom he trailed badly at that time. The next opportunity for us to bring Gerald Ford forward in the polls was that it was the bicentennial of the Declaration of Independence. And so the president decided to give 6 interlocking speeches celebrating different parts of the bicentennial. I, by that time, had become more prominent on the speechwriting staff and was able to coordinate all 6 speeches. I personally wrote the speech at Valley Forge, and one of my favorite passages for the president was this one. They came here in the snows of winter over a trail marked with the blood of their rag-bound feet. The iron forge which gave this place its name had been destroyed by the British when General Washington and his ragged Continental Army encamped here, exhausted, outnumbered, and short of everything except faith. Yet their courage and suffering, those who survived as well as those who fell, were no less meaningful than the sacrifices of those who manned the battlements of Boston or scaled the parapets of Yorktown. I think one of the things that I've dedicated my life to is making sure that people understand how important oratory is to the nation. We learn that oratory can make a person into a leader. No matter how bright and talented you are, if you can't express yourself, you'll never lead others. Good speechwriters are steeped in the classics. Plato talks about how to achieve honesty and truth. Aristotle talks about how to achieve credibility. Cicero talks about building good arguments. All of these things are important. Franklin Roosevelt probably wouldn't have galvanized the nation to fight the Depression unless he had come up with the phrase, the New Deal. Winston Churchill, in that famous speech that he was going to fight on the beaches and in the hedgerows, convinced Hitler not to invade England. Would the country have achieved its goals in space without a new frontier? These things are very important, and they're rhetorical in their impact. And I think it's important that we understand that, and that we teach our children how to write speeches, how to make speeches, how to deliver speeches, because you never know, one of them might go on to become, let alone a speechwriter for a president, they might become president of the United States. I'd love to answer any questions or comments you all have.
Craig?
Yeah.
When you talked about Nixon's speech, and then you said that a demonstration went on. Could you elaborate on what you meant?
In support of Nixon, a demonstration in support of Nixon, a convention. When the acceptance speech is normally interrupted by applause, and there's also cheering at the end, and the balloons are dropped, and so on and so forth. But this was like nothing I'd seen before. I was a consultant for CBS for conventions, election nights, and inaugurals in '68, '72. In '80, I was involved in a senatorial campaign that I ran, and then I came back to CBS in '84. So I'd seen a lot of conventions and studied a lot of conventions, but I never saw anything explosive as that moment for Nixon.
Craig, you have a question in the chat. What was the environment at the White House like when you worked for the presidents? Most of us have never worked for a president.
The environment was, enormously respectful. The White House has an intimidating dignity about it. I mean, you're walking through a hallway and you're seeing portraits of presidents and portraits of first ladies, and you're walking in history. It's remarkable. John Adams was the first president to live in the White House. And then, as you know, in 1814, the British came and burned the place down. Dolly Madison barely escaped. She got a wagon and threw some of the valuables, including the portrait of George Washington, into the wagon. Went out into the countryside, and so many people were mad about the war that they wouldn't house her. She had to go to several different houses before she was taken in. She didn't know where her husband was, the president, James Madison, but he was off with the troops fighting the British. So there's enormous history that is very important to all of us, and quite intimidating when you work in the White House and you try to respect all of that.
And here's another question. This person thinks, I think it's in Matthew, where Lincoln's a house divided against itself cannot stand. Would a 19th century crowd have known that? It's not like he attributed it to anyone, and yet there it is almost verbatim.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. They would have known that. Lincoln said it in 1858 at Springfield when he got the Republican nomination for Senate. That's where it first came up. And one of the reasons that southern states seceded, 7 states seceded before he was even inaugurated, was because he had said that. And they felt that this was someone that they could not possibly allow to be president of the United States. When you're a speechwriter, that's a judgment call that you have to make. Do you attribute the quotation, or is the quotation so well known that you don't need to? Remember that in his speech in 1964 for Barry Goldwater, Ronald Reagan said, "We have a rendezvous with destiny." Most people knew that that was FDR. He didn't have to attribute it to FDR. On the other hand, Joe Biden, during the 1988 run for the presidency, way back then, went through a whole speech that he had kind of stolen from Neil Kinnock, who was running for prime minister in England, and he didn't attribute it, and no one knew it. And when the press discovered it, Biden got in trouble and had to drop out of the race.
Thanks. Someone else asked about hand motions and gestures while speaking.
Oh, that, the rule on gesturing is that it should reinforce what you're saying, but it should not distract. So if you start waving your hands all over the place and gesticulating in all different ways, it becomes distractive. But if you want to say, my first idea is this, my second idea is this, that's okay. We try to train our clients that they should move only when it is a significant time for them to move. So you may take a step from your introduction into your first argument. You may step from the first argument into the second argument, but if you're pacing all the time, it's going to be very distracting.
I think we have a hand up from Jean Smith, so I'm going to unmute her. I think. Jean, I think you can unmute yourself and go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, my question, Craig, is how do you work with the president to get his sense of what he wants to say and then create the speech? You have to know him pretty well in order to create a speech that he is going to be able to effectively deliver, I would think. Can you just talk about that back and forth process, which I assume takes?
Yeah, it's very different from client to client. When I went to work for George H.W. Bush, I read most of the speeches that he had given to get a sense of him. And what I really found in him was a kinder, gentler man. And I wrote that into his acceptance speech in 1988 when he called for a kinder, gentler nation. But it was easy to determine that from my reading of his speeches. When I did the same thing years earlier, when I went to work for President Ford and read all of his speeches and his congressional testimony, I found nothing consistent. And so when I met with the president, I said, we need to develop a style. And he said, well, I want to speak the language of the common man. I don't want to sound eloquent. I don't want to try to be Woodrow Wilson. Can you help me with that? And that's when I showed him what Franklin Roosevelt had done. I said, look, he's speaking the language of the common man. Look at the phrase, the only thing we have to fear is fear itself. There are no big words there. So we can do that for you. If you want to use a little rhythm, a little repetition, it goes a long way. And so we were able to develop the style. I would go in when he was going to give a speech. I would go in, sit down with the president. Bob Hartman, the head of the speechwriters, would be there, and we'd discuss what the president wanted to say in a fairly general way. And then I would go back and knock out a speech, and then we would go over it and see what he liked or what he didn't like. So there has to be a melding of the minds. If the speechwriter tries to make the client into someone the client is not comfortable with, it will not work. But you can make the client sound better, more persuasive, more compelling. One of the best examples was Spiro Agnew. I don't know how many people remember Vice President Agnew under Richard Nixon, but his Bill Gavin was his main speechwriter, and he came up with all of these kind of crazy phraseologies that got the country's attention, and Agnew was soon one of the more popular speakers in America. He called the press nattering nabobs of negativism.
Oh, yes.
He called the press an elite corps of impudent snobs. And so he had a lot of fun with the language, and it worked.
I'm waiting for a break from my dog barking, but someone asked, is it new, or has it been a long time that first ladies have speechwriters?
I was once working with Walter Cronkite at a convention, and it was suddenly announced that Pat Nixon was going to come forward and address the convention in 1972. And so the question that Cronkite had for me there in the anchor booth, he said, when was the last time a first lady addressed a convention? And I said, I don't know, but I'll find out. And he said, that's the right answer. You find out and do it quickly. And so I called around, and I finally got Liz Carpenter on the phone, who was worked for the Lady Bird Johnson. And she told me that the last time a first lady had come forward was in 1940 at the Democratic convention. It was Eleanor Roosevelt to defend her husband's going for a third term. So it was very uncommon for first ladies to speak at the conventions, let alone in the campaigns. Then you had Hillary Clinton come forward in 1996, and that led to a whole new, potential first ladies coming forward and speaking. Senator Kerry's wife spoke, and then Laura Bush spoke, and now it's a regular featured slot at the conventions. So we've evolved over time.
Someone else asked if you could comment. Washington's speech really only had 135 words.
Washington's first inaugural is longer than that. It's his second inaugural that is only 135 words.
Wow.
And it is the shortest inaugural on record. And that one was delivered in Philadelphia.
And without getting into politics, someone wants to know whether Trump had a speechwriter.
Oh, yeah. Steve Miller was his main writer. And whatever you think of the politics, Steve is a talented writer. He wrote the acceptance speech at the first convention, and he wrote the acceptance speech at the last convention. I thought the acceptance speech, in 2016 was effective. It brought together the themes, of Make America Great Again. It was a little long at 75 minutes, but that's Trump. He likes to talk a lot. I think one of the things that will go down in history from the Trump administration is that when he stuck to the script that his speechwriters gave him, he did a lot better than when he went off the cuff. what he did on January 6th was to improvise the speech, and now he, that got him in a little trouble because it could be interpreted as incitement to riot. I've been talking with lawyers and other people about whether it was incitement or not, and we don't know that yet because the definitions of incitement are so difficult to deal with. It's a very difficult legal principle.
Someone else asked, was this a full-time position for you, or did you do it on a part-time basis? So you were living in Washington?
Yeah, it was when I was working for Ford, I was full-time. When I went to work for George H.W. Bush, I started in the 1978 campaign. He was going to run against Ronald Reagan and did run against Ronald Reagan. And that was a part-time consulting job. I kept my day job. And from then on, I preferred writing as a consultant because you sit around doing nothing for a long time until, a speech comes along, and then you're very busy and you're writing into the night and they want it tomorrow. And so it's a very up and down job. And I found it easier to do as a consultant. But when I worked at the White House, it was full time. I had an office in the old executive office building, number 132, look down G Street. It had high windows. It was about 2 stories high. It was a beautiful office, and I could eat at the White House mess anytime I wanted for free. So it was a great job.
And I think this might be the last question, but can you tell us one of your favorite speeches that you wrote? Maybe something we recognize, maybe something we don't, but for for Ford or for HW?
Well, there were 3 of us that worked on the acceptance speech in 1988, and you can see the different authors kind of popping up through the speech. But I did like being able to contribute a kinder, gentler nation to that speech. But I guess my favorite speech of all time was the Valley Forge speech that I quoted from. Because it was such a patriotic moment for the country, and the bicentennial brought us together, and it was a great healing time after Watergate and after the Vietnam War. And so those speeches, the 6 bicentennial speeches that President Ford gave, I thought were very important, and I was happy to have written the one at Valley Forge. And ironically, I also wrote the one he gave at Monticello, where he swore in a whole bunch of people to become new citizens in this country, which is a tradition that is carried on to this day at Monticello, Jefferson's home. Thank you all for being here and listening, and your questions are wonderful. And again, thank you for being volunteers for us.
Craig, I just want to tell you how much we appreciate that you were able to spend this time with us tonight as our a longstanding board member at the Rancho. Not all of us knew that you have these other careers besides helping the Rancho. So thanks for everything you've done, and thanks for being with us tonight, just on the heels here of President's Day weekend, to give us a lot more insight into presidential speech writing, as well as you as a presidential speech writer. Really appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Megan.
I'm going to pass the mic to Marie, who's going to give us some updates from the Rancho's gardens.
Thank you, and thank you, Craig. It really was grand. I had a couple questions recently of how much rain have we gotten in our recent rainstorms. So I thought I would let you know that we've totaled 3.81 inches, which puts us almost half of what we should be at. But I'm still grateful that we had 3.81 inches. And then, well, we haven't planted, because of COVID, any bulbs. We are having a resurgence of daffodils in the garden. So please, the next chance that you have, come walk through the backyard and you'll find jonquils and daffodils, and they're there to cheer us up in these COVID bluey days. So by all means, make use of your time and celebrate the daffodils. Thank you.
And now to Tessa for a Rancho update.
Thanks, Megan. And hello, everyone. I wanted to give you an update about our grants from this last year, and also then share a couple of grants that we've received recently. Grants have been such an important area of philanthropy for the Rancho through 2020 and this COVID time period, where we had a couple of our closest foundation partners be so thoughtful about their giving in the last year, and they allowed grantees like the Rancho to use the funds for general support and removed any designations or restrictions related to programming, since we weren't able to fulfill many of those program requirements. So we're just incredibly grateful to those foundations. The Rancho did receive $30,000 in emergency COVID grants this year as well, which were for general operations. And it's those funding sources that enabled us to reopen and keep our gardens open and accessible to our community during these COVID days, as Marie mentioned. Tonight, I'd like to announce two of our most recent grants. They're very exciting. As many of you know, we have the Water Recapture Project, and we received $1 million from the Port of Long Beach at the very tail end of 2018. Well, I am thrilled to announce that we have received another grant designated to the water project. The Metropolitan Water District has granted the Rancho $324,000. That will go towards capital expenses, and there is some built in for maintenance as well for the water project. So the Rancho board is committed to raising all the funds for the water project before we break ground, but this incredibly generous grant from MWD got us that much closer. I'd also like to announce a grant that we just found out about last week from the Navy Trust. So the Navy Trust has been a longtime supporter of the Rancho, and for this round of funding, they are supporting the completion of the restoration of our two-story 1930s living room. So I'm sure many of you were on our volunteer gathering where we watched that incredible video that Hyra had put together of all the work in that two-story living room that has been completed up to this point. This last bit of funding, $45,000 from the Navy Trust, is what's going to complete that two-story living room's restoration. So we're just incredibly grateful to both those specific funders and to all of our partners from this last year. So thanks so much. I'm going to turn it back over to Megan.
Yay, good news, Tessa. Thank you. Let's see, I want to introduce you all to someone that you might not have seen around the Rancho, but very soon you will see Craig's handiwork of the Rancho. This is Craig Sauer. He is in the library, as you can see. He has taken our 1930s radio there, and on the right-hand side is a camera. He has a Lazy Susan underneath the radio, and he turns it, I think, 24 different stops. And the beauty of that is that the Rancho then gets moving images. It's pretty exciting. The tour that we'll have coming very soon, Alana and I wanted to offer you tonight a sneak peek of the Rancho's forthcoming virtual tour. Alana?
All right. Whoop. I hit the wrong button. All right, here we go. Well,
we can start there.
I have another window in front of it. All right. Well, this was not where I intended to start, but you know, things don't always go the way we plan. So here you can see the outside of the Adobe. And I know things sometimes get a little tricky when we're moving, but this is a 360-degree view of the backyard. So we can look up at the majestic Moreton Bay fig tree. We can keep on spinning and see the Italian cypress back here, Virginia Country Club gate, and then everything else in between. So this is an outdoor space that was shot somewhat similarly, but what we really wanted to show you was some of the indoor spaces. So what came about from Craig doing that photography. So let's go back to the 1850s and the foreman's room. So this similarly has a 360-degree view, but you can also see these little dots. And so those will be for specific artifacts, or this one that's green. In each room, there's a description of what the room is to give a general context to what a virtual visitor in the virtual tour would see. And then if you go to these other ones that are all a different color, that would be specific artifacts. And it does take just a moment for it to load. So I think this past year has been a lesson in sort of patience. So we'll see if it appears.
Patience on the one hand and amazing technology.
Yay, there it is. Ta-da, isn't this fantastic? And because it was shot the same way that that radio was shot in what Megan showed, we can now spin the statue around and we can see every single side of this artifact. So for the most part, you're able to see things that even people who have been giving house tours might not have seen before. So you're able to see these artifacts in a new way. And for visitors, well, so there's also other artifacts here that we're sharing. That one does not spin because the ledger is a flat book, but we've got the Rawhide Chair. And so this one will be, the smaller artifacts you'll see won't have a background. So they were shot in a different way. And some of the things were a little too big for that, but Craig was able to be creative and take them in the spot where they are. So we still get to see, now we get to see the back of this Rawhide Chair and see all of the sides of that right there in the spot where it's located in the room. So another cool thing. And then if you have given a house tour before or for a program been inside the rooms, you might have been beyond the barrier, but a lot of visitors wouldn't have that opportunity. But if you see these circles that are on the floor, that's a way to move around the room. So if I click this one, it will take me to the far end of the room. And now you can see the windowsill much more clearly than a visitor in person would have been able to do before. So we're getting to see different sides of things and new things and different perspectives with this new format. And like that outside shot, you can spin around and really get the full view as if you were standing in the room. So now looking back out that way. So that's a new perspective that a visitor might not have been able to see before.
That will certainly look familiar to our house docents.
Yes. So to jump around in time a little bit, let's venture now to the
We're just sampling a few of the rooms for you. This probably looks familiar to most of you. Again, Alana has, in these tags that we've written, color-coded, so the picture, sorry, the green one in the foreman's room or the green one here in the parlor tells you what is the point of the room. And then do you want to give a close-up to Elizabeth, the doll here?
Oops. Yes.
Another one on the Lazy Susan.
She's coming.
She's coming. She's worth the wait. And this is something of you that our docents, frankly, our staff really hasn't seen, since that's such a precious artifact. It really did belong to Sarah Bixby, and we know that Nan, in a fit of rage and jealousy, broke its head, and then Sarah says the doll's head was replaced more beautifully than ever before. Maybe she wishes it had been broken earlier so she would have had this beautiful China doll head to play with. But we very carefully put the doll on the Lazy Susan, put some museum wax below it, and then Craig took that rotating picture. Do you want to, oh, the stove does a similar thing, Alana. So some of you remember in Adobe Days the story about the toy stove and how Harry and Sarah were upstairs and they threw the bed sheets, thank you Joy, over them when they were lighting kindling in there. They wanted to hide the evidence from their parents. Harry apparently scampered out the window and Sarah was opening the door to the mother and aunts who were none too pleased to smell the burning kindling. Nothing happened, except Sarah got in trouble. This is a replica, a period appropriate replica that we have on display in the parlor, but nobody gets to pick that thing up and turn it around and see it up close like that.
Are we?
Oh, this is a fun one too. We can't, it's a virtual tour. We can't lift up and hand to our visitors the stereoscope. They can't even see a double vision, but they certainly can get a sense of the mechanism, the very popular photography toy here, basically in the 1870s. So we're showing some of the highlights in each of the room. We're telling about them. So you have the visual, you have the verbal or written. We're also able to show some close-ups, like the picture of Lincoln and Tad that has a little blue dot on it. And there people will be able to see it more closely than they have before. It doesn't tell everything, but boy, for people who are not able to come on site, which is who this tour is for, right? It's a virtual tour that people will access through the internet. And they'll be able to step behind, just like our docents do, and see the room from new angles. See how everything connects together. In this case, they'll actually be able to look at the cabinet and the books that we have in the parlor, where most people stand with their back to that item. We wanted to show you as well one of the rooms that is coming in the 1930s renovations that we've been doing. Many of you have seen what I fondly refer to as my old office. It was Jan Schaefer's office too, and other people's in the wing. You may have seen the living room, which is adjacent to the parlor off of in our first virtual gathering. Unless you're a curatorial volunteer, you may never have had cause to be up in the old curator's office. Now with the curtains off and the windows restored, the flooring is just absolutely beautiful. You're looking out over the arbor there. That come March 17th should be in full bloom, right, Laura?
And there's Marie.
Is Marie actually in the picture?
No, but her little cottages. She might be in there.
She could have been there when we were filming. We will have a close-up of our interpretive picture, but this is kind of fun. This is behind the master bedroom. You can go a 360 in the room. At some point in the future, it will be furnished. If Alana stands in, just looking down the hallway, maybe, Alana? Oh, sorry, you're showing the interpretive work. And Tess is correct. We did show a walkthrough of there. Here it goes to the two different dressing room closets, and then on the right is the bathroom. Looks a lot like the bathroom in the downstairs future Llewellyn Bixby Jr. bedroom. 1930s color of tiling. Looks a lot like some of our bathrooms today, right? If our house is a little bit older or we like that style. And then on the left, sadly, it doesn't open, but one day it will, is this cabinet on the immediate left there, the yellow cabinet, that is a dumbwaiter that goes to the downstairs kitchen, our kitchen that we just use it to hold napkins and plates and so forth today. But when the whole 1930s restoration comes online, I believe that dumbwaiter will be part of a display as well, an exhibit.
All right, and then there is one more of the outdoor space. So here we have the opposite side of the house. So from this view, you can see the orchard, the adobe, the carreta, and as we pivot this way, lovely California native plants and the commemorative plaque that is over here, as well as more of the native garden and the other way. So the picture quality is so good. You can be here and read the plaque, or you can take more of the big picture, seeing it, the full view of everything. So we have been working on the indoor spaces that you saw. So there's different artifacts that is, we're coming towards the end of that, but the great thing about this format is that it can be added to. So we are hoping to go live to the public with this virtual tour in March. And then we might be able to, our goal is to add some more of these outdoor spaces as time goes on. So first it will be mainly the house, and then these views like we've seen where it's kind of that big panoramic 360 view of the outdoor spaces. And in those views, you get to see most of the garden. And then we might have more specific garden things coming in the future. But for right now, we just wanted to sort of whet your appetite with a couple of the rooms and that just let you know that this is coming soon. And we're very excited about it and excited about how we can continue to develop it in the future to create even more virtual content for if people can't come on site, or just for those who might live farther away, they will still be able to experience the Rancho in this new way.
We actually started this, I think it was last January, early February, that the two rooms upstairs in the Adobe were the first foray into virtual touring. And that's because people with a difficult time climbing stairs for whatever reason couldn't visit upstairs. And the best we could offer at that time was a binder with pictures and text about the upstairs. So when Craig offered initially to do those two rooms upstairs, and we had the idea that we would put an iPad downstairs and it would be easier to kind of walk through upstairs. And that's certainly still a possibility once we're able to open the museum again. We're real pleased to start working with Craig. We told you this last fall, over time to create an entire virtual tour. So this is one of those opportunities that COVID has allowed for us to see. We didn't really think of it in the same way prior to COVID, but with the closure of the museum last March, things have changed dramatically, and this allows us to extend our reach off-site and on-site, really, as people can see more behind the scenes. This does not substitute in any way for somebody's interaction with a docent, but it certainly allows for more opportunities for people to see and experience the Rancho in new and different ways. So we're real excited coming in March, just like Alana said. It is now on to Laura.
Hello, everyone. It's now time for us to check in, and we get to see and hear from all of you. So can we start doing that now?
Yep, just give us a sec.
All right.
All right, maybe I'm in a minute, not a sec.
All right. Looks like we have promoted you all to panelists. And so listening to Craig's speech, I thought a fun prompt would be, what speech from the past, who would you like to hear give an oration that you can't hear today? And I'm presently reading a book called The Underground Railroad. And since it's Black History Month, I was thinking I would love to, if I could have heard Frederick Douglass speak. He was supposed to be an incredible orator. And I looked up and he was never recorded. So I would love to have been able to hear what it sounded like to hear him speak about abolition. So how about the rest of you? If you want to raise your hand, if you have a preference of, if you'd like to share your view of who you would like to hear from and give a speech in history.
There it is.
Do Jean and Gail want to share who you would like to hear from? Since you just unmuted yourselves? No?
I would love to hear from the RLC players.
Ah, that's a good one.
You asked.
Oh, and Nancy, and by the way, for Lloyd, when Lloyd and Dale did the thing about the pictures last time, I think it was, we were really impressed with that. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Absolutely, yes. That was an incredible presentation.
Yeah.
What did you like most?
I think they passed the mic to you as well as the kudos. So Floyd and Nancy, who would you like to hear from in history?
Who would we like to hear from? Yeah. I don't know. Jotham, maybe.
I don't know either. Too spur of the moment, I can't think that.
Maybe it'll come to you. Do you want to pass the mic to somebody else?
Are you there? Can you hear me?
We can now. We were having a hard time hearing you earlier.
Oh.
Oh, and now you're muted.
Yes. Well, Joy and Hyam, do you have something to say about this goings on here? You can do it by pressing the space bar on your keyboard and holding it down.
There you go. You got it.
I got it finally. What was the question after all that?
Who would you like to hear from history? Who would you like to hear give a speech or?
I think Lincoln.
Or FDR.
Definitely. After hearing him quote some parts of his speeches, I really thought that would have been great to hear.
I still remember when we went to see the Lincoln Memorial in Washington, D.C., and on the wall they have the Gettysburg Address. And when I read that, I wept. It was so moving. Hein?
Yeah, I liked FDR to hear his speeches.
So should we tap somebody else who is available? I can't see. How about Linda Midget?
Oh, let's see, from the Rancho. I think I'd like to hear something about Ephigenia, the cousin, because at one time I portrayed her in school tours, and I don't really think there's all that much known about her. Or if you go back in history, I'd like to hear from some of the early suffragettes, Susan B. Anthony or Elizabeth Cady Stanton, because I think they were both incredibly good speakers.
Very good. Who would you like to pass it on to?
Whomever volunteers. I don't want to pick on anybody.
Okay, I'll pick on Terry because he just started his video and unmuted himself, so.
Oh boy, okay. Well, I just recently read a little bit, quite a bit, and watched a video on, good long video on President Grant. I'd like to hear him speak, and then maybe we would all know that he wasn't always drunk. Plus, I think he now has turned to my favorite president. I now think he is one of the best presidents we ever had.
There was a
I
series.
switched from Washington to Lincoln to him now. That's it.
All right, who do you want to pass it on to?
I'll pass it on to, can't see, how about Dale? He's on there, isn't he, somewhere? Dale Hills, is he around?
He is. I see him down here in the corner. Dale, are you still there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay.
I'm just amazed. I think Dr. Craig's speech was incredible. I was making little notes and little blurbs on my little scratch pad here, and we need more people like him in the political fields. Yeah, and we need to get back to the Rancho. I need some more woodwork.
I got some for you.
I'm not gonna carve no stupid cowboys. All right, I'm gonna mute myself right now.
Wait, who are you going to pass it to?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, let's hear from Marcia.
Well, of course, I would want Fanny Bixby, but if you're talking presidential wise, I would
not
want.
Necessarily.
Well, Theodore Roosevelt's A Strenuous Life. I've always wanted to hear him actually do it because the recording was so bad of it. But I would not want to hear Lincoln because we all think Lincoln's voice is real deep, but he had a real high-pitched, squeaky voice, and I wouldn't want to hear Lincoln. I like the speeches, but I wouldn't want to hear it from him. And picking wise, let's see. Since I can't see, I'm guessing is somebody's raising their hand or something. Susan, is Susan Mayo there? Oh, good. My machine was good. It said it was Susan. Okay, good. Thanks. Okay.
Susan's trying to check out. I came up with Corrie ten Boom. She's not a president, but I think she'd be somebody that would be really interesting to talk to.
Tell us a little bit about her, Susan.
What's that?
I don't know who she is. Can you tell us a little about her?
Corrie ten Boom, she and her family had rescued some of the not persecuted Jews, but the Jews that were hiding from being taken into concentration camp. And when they got discovered, she and her sister, well, I think her whole family was taken away into concentration camps, but she survived and she got to come to America. And according to Joel, our new guy, he said that she was buried in Orange County. Yeah. The Corrie ten Boom, The Hiding Place. There's been a movie about her.
Oh, that would be fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay, who do you want to pass it to before you sign off?
Let's go to Marie.
Well, I would love to chat with Ralph Cornell. And well, he wrote prodigious speeches. They ran on longer than I do, so I'm not sure I'd want to sit through one of them. But if I were to talk to a public speaker, a public personality, Martin Luther King Jr. has always, and maybe it's just because of my youth, but he really captured my imagination in my youth. And so that would be somebody that has always just fascinated me. And now I have to pass it on to, how about Lori Adams? I haven't seen you in a while. Why don't you talk?
Okay, well, I'll go back to the Rancho and say Martha Hathaway, because I think she had a very interesting life. And she was a teacher. And I would like to just chat with her and see how she came to finally live for a small time at the Rancho. I pass it on. Pass it on to Tom. Tom, wake up there.
Okay, I'm thinking Benjamin Franklin would be really interesting to talk to. I mean, his inventions, his whole going back and forth from France, the whole time that he had of the building of America and what was going on. I think that would be a very interesting person to talk to. So I'm trying to see who else is here. How about, see, Laura, yes, Laura already said something. How about Alana?
So I'm also checking the YouTube chat, and Sandra is our big YouTube fan that watches every month, and she was saying she would say either Abraham Lincoln or Nelson Mandela. So another Lincoln, but then a new suggestion. For me, I would love to hear from Toy Purina, just because that's the only name I know from the Tongva from back the time before the Rancho was there, just to hear firsthand what her life was like. We have what we think, but maybe she would say something different. Ronald Reese, I call upon you.
Well, I would like to hear more personally from Sherlock Bones and his adventures on the Rancho.
But we were also thinking, Ron and I were thinking that we would like to hear from Don Gaspar de Portola.
Yeah. First governor of the two Californias.
Oh, yeah.
Lois, are you there? I see your name.
Have to do that.
And then,
Okay. Am I here now? Can you hear?
Yes.
Well, I was thinking Abraham Lincoln. I know people have mentioned him, but I think that would be really interesting. And the speaker spoke a little bit about what his speech. I've heard some of, the real famous parts, but that would be interesting. And Phil is here. He would like to hear Harry Truman, hear him talk and hear more about him. I don't see anybody's name, so I don't really know how to do it.
Or Anne Frank.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I think you have to do that. Share. Wait, there. Oh, share screen.
If you can't see, I'll let you know who.
No, I can't see it.
Okay, Lynn, did you want to contribute?
Yeah, I'd like to hear from John Temple why he picked that particular piece of California, how he married his wife, and how he designed the house. I mean, we know what it looks like now, but what was his original concept? Maybe it grew.
To copy the Larkin house, wasn't it?
Pardon me?
I think it was to copy the Larkin house.
Oh, I haven't read anything about that. So, okay. Where was Larkin's house?
Up in the Monterey area.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Do you want to pass it to somebody? I think that Ina hasn't talked yet.
Okay, Ina.
Okay, can hear me. I'm kind of stepping away from government and going to authors because I just love writers. And I'd really like to hear what Louisa May Alcott would have to say. Because when she wrote Little Women, it was kind of a different time. When she wrote her book, Little Men, it was really different. And she was really different because she wanted to be single, but she had to write her books. And I understand she had to change the endings to make them marketable. So I really would love to hear what she had to do to make that happen.
That would be fascinating. Well, this has turned out to be really good. A lot of people have had great ideas. I don't think we've heard from Megan yet, have we?
Well, this morning on a project I was working on, I was reading Harry Bixby's diary, which is really fun. And I just thought you all would like to hear from Harry Bixby today, since that would be a fun person to learn more about the rancho.
Uh-huh.
It's not exactly today, but close enough. Monday, February 23rd, 1885. There was no school today because yesterday was Washington's birthday and it was celebrated today. This morning I fixed my bicycle and rode to Hops, that's his friend. I fooled around the hill in Los Angeles till noon and then ate dinner with Warren, another friend. After dinner, I started home and was on my way down there when I took a pretty awful header, but it didn't hurt the bicycle and didn't do anything except take a little skin off my hand. This afternoon, I went down and saw the procession for Washington's birthday, which by the way, didn't amount to much. Then I went up the hill and read. This evening, I studied my arithmetic most of the time. He was 14 years old. He kept a diary, which I'm guessing he got from his birthday or Christmas in December. It was January 1st, 1885 until September 1885, right before he went back east to Yale for prep school. So it was kind of fun to read his diary today from the Rancho's lending library. So that's another place to get books that you might want to borrow, along with the books that people have put in the visitor center for sharing. Anyway, Harry's diary, not the only person I'd like to meet from history or learn from, but let me just tell you one more thing. When my son was in 4th grade, the older one, he didn't want to go on the Rancho tour with his class because they'd been to the Rancho too many times, my children, on their own. So I convinced him that if he dressed up as Harry Bixby, he could be part of the tour. And indeed, he dressed up as Harry Bixby, probably the only child, maybe besides Alana, who's ever actually participated in the Rancho field trip. And he told his friend Joey, I must bear a striking resemblance to this fellow named Jaeger Metz because people keep calling my name and that's not me, I'm Harry Bixby. He taught him how to play games. He didn't know much more than his name and how to play games, but he was pretty cute.
That's a great story. Thank you, Megan.
Is there anybody else who wants to talk? Claire, did you want to contribute?
I did get one more text from someone, Ellen, who's on the line, sort of, and she would love to meet and listen to the founding fathers in the original, see what they would think of what the country has become over the next nearly 250 years.
How do I get back here? Okay, here we go.
Okay, I think it's time to wrap it up, unless anybody would like to say anything. Well, thank you all for coming and participating in our virtual gathering. I really enjoyed it, and that seems like a lot of you did too. And I hope to see you all around the Rancho soon, either for our public hours, which have been quite crowded lately. We had 70 people at the Rancho on Sunday and over 50 on Saturday, so it's been very crowded. You can also come to the bird walks on the second Thursday, but you must make a reservation. And
Birding opportunity, not a bird walk. It's a birding opportunity.
A birding opportunity, yes. And I'm not able to get to my my script, so I'm not remembering what other things I'm forgetting. What am I forgetting, Megan?
The virtual coffee, can you let people know?
Oh, yes, the virtual coffee, our new time will be it'll be every second and fourth Monday. So the next one will be next week on Monday. So, and we've been having more people come to that. So that's been a lot of fun. And I think that's about it. So happy Fat Tuesday to everybody.
And Lunar New Year, happy Valentine's Day, happy President's Day, happy February.
All right.
Thank
Bye, everyone.
well.
Thank you. It's good to see you all.
Take care. Be well.
You too.